So I'll start off by not only welcoming all of you, my relatives, Shea Kia Ani Neshledo Bilagana Bashishchin, Deschini Deshachedo Bilagana Deshanele, Tohatsoi the Natsha. So I live here on the foothills of the beautiful Chushkai Mountain, who not only protects us, but gives us the healing energy and herbs that we need to heal ourselves. I represent 7 communities on the Navajo Nation: Sheep Springs, Two Gray Hills, Tolina, Sanosti, Red Valley, Cove, Gadiai, and Biklabato. On the Navajo Nation, I am the chairwoman of the Sexual Assault Prevention Subcommittee. This committee was established by the prior council to address the challenges that Navajo Nation relatives are facing with the loss of baby girl Ashton Mike. We continue to have the hard conversations regarding what we can do better as relatives to not only start by believing that, knowing that these type of violence is not only happening in our communities, or we have a long history of violence within our communities, but that it also happens in our homes. And it happens between relatives, and use this time to tell their stories, believe them. But in the journey to justice is also the journey of healing. And if we could heal one another, so I know if I'm a healed grandma, auntie, and mother, then I'm breaking that cycle, and I'm providing that healing path for my children and all of our younger relatives who are watching us, and mirroring our actions and making sure that we create that safe space and those kind words. And so we'll connect together through prayer. So I always just like to ground myself. Our Mother, our Father, we just thank the Holy Ones this morning, this afternoon, and as we come together, we just ask for the blessing that you provide for us, the blessing of the moisture, of the cool air, the fire, and all of the other elements through this muddy landscape that you provide, that we slow it down, that we make sure that we're safe, that we reconsider our travels and make sure that we connect together in a healing kind way. In this discussion that we talk about, Holy Ones, we just ask for your guidance, for the right words of compassion, our ears to hear and be open to discussion and dialogue, and using our 2 hands and our mind to really advocate and hear the cries of our people, and collectively bring in that healing energy for them, to know that they're not forgotten, to know that their story has been heard, and that they themselves are of value, and that they themselves have their healing journey, and that we place no judgment, and that we look in with our healing journey for those who perpetrate against us, that we could find compassion for them and their experience, but also keep them accountable for their behavior and what they have done, and how they can heal so that they will no longer be a threat to others, and that our communities can be safe, that we can live here in our homelands without the fear of violation, without the fear of violence, without the fear of abduction, and without the fear of our children being hurt. Holy Ones, we just continue to ask for those teachings from our animals who protect us from the 4 different directions and the mountains that surround us, that we're blessed here to be on our homelands for many generations, where many, many mothers, grandmothers, great-grandmothers have prayed, and have prayed to the seeds for the next generation, for our generation. They did not know our name, but they prayed us into essence. They prayed us for us to have that thinking power. They prayed for us to have that voice. They prayed for us to have the tools that we need to reclaim, with power, with prayer, with ceremony. just ask you to be with us today, our changing woman, as you brought life to us, and that we have a duty and an obligation to protect those who may not have that agency right now to protect themselves. That we come together collectively to advocate for those who may need additional support through this legal landscape of jurisdiction and social injustice. That we pray for those families who are currently looking for those who are missing, who have been forgotten, for those who are on the street unsheltered. We pray for all of those families healing and to give the strength of those who are taken from us, that mental fortitude to come back home, to know that we continue to pray for their return, that we'll continue to pray for their strength, and that we are not whole until they return and they are back with us. And we pray for our children. Holy ones, we need to give them the strength in their little minds as they're forming together, that they do not understand what's happening, but that we give them the strength and we give them that curiosity to protect themselves and to be able to speak when they're being hurt and harmed. And for those adults, teachers, counselors to hear them and to advocate for them. And for all of our law enforcement, social workers, all of our teachers, all of the advocates, all of the community members to be empowered and to know their strength, that they're part of that healing journey and to heal themselves. Holy ones, we need this guidance because it's painful. It's painful to know what has happened to us. It's painful to know that someone chose to hurt us, but it's through our healing power of our herbs, our songs, and our prayers that we're restored. And we do that in all directions. And so we just ask again for the protection of our children so that we could respect our elders and that we make sure that we stay strong through our clanship system and use that to guide us without blame, without shame, that generational trauma be laid to rest, that we rise up together and continue in the most beautiful way. And I say this with all of my heart. I say this with all of my love. And then take a breath in and connect. And so now we're all connected together in our healing journey. And I just want to thank the organizers for hosting this and all of those who are participating this afternoon. At any time, please note that if you have to step away, if it's too much at one time, just stay connected with yourself and step away if needed. And we'll be here when you return, or we'll be here when you're ready to return. So Shadeja for allowing me to provide the welcome and the prayer. And I will, I believe then it's back to you.
We can go ahead and segue into the human trafficking, how that looks like on the Navajo Nation, some of the work and history that yourself and Delegate Brown had engaged in since 2016. And just want to give you a really quick time check if you're okay with me checking in.
Mm-hmm.
Have about 15 minutes until our first breakout session. So
okay, thank you.
Delegate Brown.
Time checks are wonderful because I'm a talker, so I could just keep talking and praying. But I wanted to see if Delegate Brown, if you're on the line, I'd like to give you that honor and respect in the work that you've done with Navajo Nation human trafficking and that education and awareness. As I have girls. I'm a mother of two. With all of my other nieces and nephews, and this was a very challenging subject. And so sometimes the work that we do is so challenging that we need to we need to have some type of respite. And it was Delegate Brown then who took up the charge to continue and engage in the training and advocacy for human trafficking when it was just too I was too emotionally invested into that. So if Delegate Brown is on the line, I'd like to defer to him, and or I could continue with the story of how Navajo Nation finally recognized the human trafficking that was happening on the nation. Thank you.
Ayat Eshima-san, Ado Shadeja, Jolene. Can you guys hear me? Sound check?
Yes.
Okay. Yeah. Really quickly, well, I'm just here for support. I'm listening, and however I can be of assistance. Um, yeah, Shima-san, Delegate Crotty, for your continued efforts, hard work. It's not easy work, and everyone that's on the line for your work in combating human trafficking. It's a heinous crime um, that's impacting our Navajo people, and unfortunately, not a lot of our people do know. So when we ask questions of our people if they know what human trafficking is, I still get a lot of response that people don't know, or if they do, they usually think that it only happens overseas, far away from us. So we need to continue to educate them, and my work within our work within the Navajo Nation Council will continue, as well as with at the state level. So with the state of Arizona, we will continue to advocate and collaborate with the multiple wonderful entities who combat human trafficking. Specifically, I think we will continue to change laws. That's a huge initiative that we need to undertake. Some are Supreme Court case laws, and some are laws that still have not been created. So that is our job as legislatures, as Navajo Nation Council delegates. Um, and we have a wonderful opportunity now at the federal level to really come together with our initiatives and talk to the leadership of Congress, the House, and the White House as well. So I'm glad that this worked, and we did produce with, CU Boulder, with Shadeja, with Navajo Nation Social Service, the data from Navajo Nation Police, IHS, criminal investigator, producing a white paper on human trafficking on the Navajo Nation. I think we do have a great start on providing all that information to our federal partners. So we will continue, um, and the other thing would be, I think the education needs to happen to our elders, and that's something that I will that we can work together on. How do we explain human trafficking in Navajo? I know before we did start with a group, and that's something we need to pick back up again. I will um, follow through with that with Diné College or Navajo Technical University and all our partners that are listening. If we can have more involvement from our elder population so we can adequately explain the importance of what is human trafficking on the Navajo Nation and Indian country. Unfortunately, with some of our federal partners and law enforcement agencies, they still have the term child prostitution, and that needs to change. We need to tackle these, and I will on standby on how we can tackle these initiatives. So again, I will be listening, um, and just I'm here. Yeah, thank you, Shadeja, and everyone that's listening. Yeah. And then finally, adong gich sinda. Shea toba hanch le dan hotsode. Ado kiani dashiche azasana dashinale. On look a bashishin. So thank you, everyone. And I represent 3 communities in Chilchimbito, Danahoto, and Kayenta chapter, as well as Kayenta Township. So thank you, everyone. Ahon Sohodole. Thank you so much.
Yeah, Shana, for sharing that incredible information, just to kind of illustrate what Delegate Brown had been speaking to in terms of our human trafficking initiative. Pictured here, you'll see the very beginning of that foundation when we created this movement on Navajo. We started with very important partnerships with CU Boulder, as well as Casey Family Programs. In the picture to the left, you'll see a picture of Delegate Brown standing with members of Casey Family Programs, as well as a very integral, fierce person that helped us through all of this, Miss Kate Finn on the far right of that left picture. If you look at the picture on the right, this was a collective of advocates and social workers, folks who came together who really believed in this cause that we were trying to bring the attention to. If you look at the gentleman in that second picture on the far left side, his name is Eric Gale, and he's incredibly important to this because as a family advocate, he took a human trafficking training and he realized and recognized that the cases that he was working with in terms of child sex abuse were actually trafficking cases. Because of that really important education and training and recognizing what trafficking is, this is where that movement started for Navajo Nation, and this is in 2016. So with that, work got started, and in 2017, Delegate Brown as well as Delegate Crotty sponsored very good legislation to pass the Navajo Nation law against human trafficking. And it was done through community-based research, a lot of training, collaboration, awareness, prevention. And we were also able to partner with different programs to create the Blue campaign. And we had these human trafficking awareness walks each January. So just a really quick, if for the folks who might not understand what sex trafficking is, but trafficking occurs when someone uses force, fraud, or coercion to cause a commercial sex act to occur. This includes activities such as prostitution, pornography, sexual performance done in exchange for anything of value. That can be money, drugs, shelter, food, clothing, or just for survival in general. Stop it. Quick indicators of trafficking is a lot of areas that we have, such as socioeconomic factors, really create these pockets of poverty and poor local economy. With a very large rural and geographic area, the Navajo Nation has become a very prime spot where a lot of our most vulnerable populations are targeted. I'm trying to mute Sharon. Sharon V, could you please mute your line? Thank you. And some of those development indicators also include things like casinos, hotels, gaming enterprises, and the presence of organized crime. Trafficking also takes the form of online grooming, and this is done through social media to entice, especially our youth. There were some cases in Western Navajo where there were young girls who were being preyed upon via Facebook, and they would look at how vulnerable the young lady would be. What was her family situation like? Was alcohol or drug dependency factor into that? You know, was a home life not good? Then they would implement these grooming tactics to target these young women. We also had stories from the community in border towns where young single mothers who were in laundromats were also being targeted. These traffickers had a strategy in delineating who they were able to groom from the outset. I believe this was some information that was passed to Delegate Crotty and had conveyed to us like in another group setting. But apparently the perpetrator would go to these laundromats or grocery stores, and they would go to a young Navajo mother and say, you know, like, oh, wow, you're incredibly beautiful. Like, you have a beautiful smile. And that went one of two ways. If the young lady just rebuffed him, the trafficker would move on, because then they know that would be a little bit harder for them to groom the person. However, if the person, you know, was you know, like, oh, really? Oh, okay. Then that's when the grooming would start, really playing on the emotions and the vulnerability of our people out there. Other indicators of trafficking on Navajo is interpersonal violence, domestic violence, sexual violence, as well as generational trauma that's very familiar to Native communities. With these different indicators that are intersecting with one another, along with housing insecurity, job insecurity, the loss of land, the loss of culture, these different areas play into the trafficking issue on Navajo. So going back to what trafficking also looks like on Navajo Nation in terms of the child sex abuse cases is that the DFS worker, Eric Gale, had observed that sex trafficking was actually misidentified, and many of those cases actually involved trafficking when it came to child sex abuse. I do want to give you all some warning. The next example that I'm going to provide may be a bit heavy. If you need to step away from your computer or take some time for yourself, please do what you need to self-regulate your body. So we had a few cases where children were being exchanged for money or services. And this was in between families and in between communities. Most of those cases did involve the FBI, and that's where the information is where we were able to get that. There were instances of where there were family members who were trafficking children in parking lots for casino money. But that's not to say, you know, that's something that's regular. We're just trying to give you an idea of what that could look like on the Navajo Nation. So it definitely takes, it has many facets to it. We have very large corridors that go through the Navajo Nation. You have the I-40, you have Highway 491, you have Highway 89, where there's a lot of high traffic of folks that are not from our community. A lot of times, that is also a contributing factor. And I just wanted to do a really quick time check, and we are at 4:30. So in terms of the missing and murdered intersection, we understand that a lot of folks who are missing or murdered generally are victims that are forced into commercial sexual exploitation, and they're at a much greater risk of being murdered. Adults and teens who may run away are actually the most vulnerable by sex traffickers. So there were a couple of studies that are taking place right now that are looking into the data to respond to this missing and murdered crisis. Nationally, murder is the third leading cause of death among Alaska Natives. In that report, which was given by the Urban Indian Health Institute in 2017, reported that of the 5,712 cases, only 116 of those murder cases were actually logged into the Department of Justice database. So what those numbers actually are still in the process of being found out by these different organizations. But that just kind of illustrates to you what not only nationally we're up against, but even on the Navajo Nation, in terms of what we're facing as well, and the lack of data and the disconnect between agencies not reporting, or possibly the issue of misclassification of cases. Just to giving you an idea of where the highest numbers of the MMIW cases are, New Mexico is #1. I think a lot of folks who may be on this call are probably from the New Mexico area or are familiar with it. But the majority of the cases right now are in the Albuquerque and the Gallup area. Arizona comes in 3rd, and then Utah right there is 3rd from the last of the 10. That's not looking good for our area, but it's good that we know these numbers so that we can increase those awarenesses and really start to tell these stories and have these awareness events like the one that we're having today, especially regarding human trafficking. So I just wanted to give you a really quick 101 basics of what that looks like on the Navajo Nation. And I want to introduce our next presenter, who is Moroni Benali. He is with the Restoring Ancestral Winds. And I know we're moving a bit quickly, but I want to make sure that we get in all the content that we can. Moroni, I will pass it on to you. Feel free to go ahead and start.
Good morning.
Are you ready, Moroni?
Oh, hello?
Hi.
Oh, there you are. I went on a whole thing and no one was listening. All right, my name is Moroni Benali. I work for Restoring Ancestral Winds. Nashashi Nislito, but Anibashis Chindo, Tuahane, Dashacheto, Tabai, Dashanala. Akut out the Nenchlim. I live in Salt Lake City, and our Restoring Ancestral Winds is a tribal coalition that serves tribes in the Great Basin area, and we work quite extensively with the MMDR task force. One of the things that we wanted to talk through was this idea of healing and how like how do we heal and what does that mean? And so even the word that's been used to describe a missing person is actually a word that describes imbalance in Navajo. Imbalance means that someone is missing. There's a piece of the whole that is gone. And so that's what the word is. And in Navajo, it implies a moral wrong. And so when we get into trafficking, I won't go into too much of that. You just had the basics of that. But I just want to take a quick look at just generically this current model for criminal justice, which essentially shapes the Navajo Nation, right? Navajo Nation attempts to use these Navajo principles within a criminal justice system that is inherently disconnected from these Navajo systems. And so there's a disconnect there in healing. And so we look at this criminal justice model that a crime is primarily offense against the government rather than a wrong against a private wrong. And that's a very different way of looking at crime or even someone going missing. And so if we take a look at all the literature, there's a whole bunch of literature out there, and this concept of missing persons it's vague. There's no real agreement. I mean, what seems to can bring them all together is this idea that there's just something out of place, which seems to be the underlying notion informing these various concepts of missing persons across the literature. And this is the type of literature that ends up reflected in all of the training work that is done around this. And so when we start thinking about this, we can start to think about the antecedents of those specific programs and trainings that sort of just like unwittingly leave out a Navajo form of healing. So for example, the Congressional Research Service in 2019 about this, all of this is basically saying adults go missing to personal choice. There's no real responsibility. If families need something for adults that go missing, it's limited. Things are voluntary. And so this seems to stand at odds with how we understand Navajo, like Hojon and balance itself. And so with this diagram here, what I wanted to show this is the person, right? Who has something going on, who is impacted in some way. There's historical trauma in the way they think about themselves, the actual thoughts that come to their minds. They carry the trauma from something hidden in their body. And their entire framework about themselves is based on a framework of worthlessness or something else. And that's at the bottom of their mind. And it's reflected in their relationship with their environment, with the animals, and most importantly, reflected in how they live their lives, like the condition of their homes themselves. And so when someone goes missing, what ends up happening is this, whatever it is disrupted. And these relationships that we have with each other, which constitute the Navajo Nation. So if someone goes missing, this relationship is reciprocal. It goes this way, and it impacts their family, their friends, and their communities. And it could impact them in all different ways. It could impact their thoughts. It could impact their bodies. We know cases where people's bodies are physically impacted when someone goes missing. And it impacts the mind, the healthy mind that they had, and it starts to shift them. It reflects how they start to interact within their communities. And if we look at this idea here of these relationships, Kehwingzen is really this entire set of relationships that guides interactions between each other in order for each other to lift ourselves to Hojon, or this state of Hojon. And so when we see something happen, like these relationships, they get muddled and we're not able to get through. And that in Navajo is imbalance. And so when we look at how both of these, when someone goes missing, impacts the entire Navajo Nation. It impacts the laws that guide ourselves, which then impact how we take care of ourselves, how we are able to provide for the Navajo Nation through development of whatever. It impacts our relationships with each other as citizens of the nation, as family. It impacts the way, the authenticity in how we use the words of the clanship, like of the kinship system. Sometimes we use the word Shema as just sort of like context-free mother, but in Navajo, this Shema implies all of these things. But when one goes missing, these are all muddled. And in Navajo, that is imbalance. And so the current system we have doesn't even address these critical components necessary for healing. And so this translation, the five-fingered earth surface relative who is missing from home. The home meaning one's heart, not just this home, but home also means the mind of our mind is family home. And so this diagram here shows these unfettered relationships, right? That we saw before, where these things are disconnected. And so what we have here then is when someone goes missing or murdered, it's just not a specific isolated legal incident. Rather, according to Navajo, it impacts everything. And if we're really serious and want to start healing our people, we have to take a different understanding and approach to how one goes missing and what that means. And so that's a very quick overview within the time I was allotted, but we'll save questions for the breakout session, right, Jolene? Thank you.
Thank you so much, Marone. I really appreciate you giving that really critical analysis in terms of what that looks like for our community. So what we're going to do now is we're going to put everyone into a breakout room. Just for the sake of time, it will be a random selection. So I want to encourage everyone to talk about what Moroni had. You're looking at is what it is. No, Moroni, I don't know if there's maybe one or 2 points that you'd like folks to discuss in terms of the presentation that you just provided.
Yeah, I would like for folks to just sort of think about the idea that when someone goes missing, it is equivalent to a harm in Navajo. a harm to one's body, a harm to one's home, a harm to the entire nation itself, and also a harm to Mother Earth, honestly, because those things are connected. So I want people to start thinking about that, and also think about how could this Navajo concept be accommodated within the current Navajo system that doesn't necessarily recognize that.
Perfect. Okay. So I'm going to start moving folks into a room with a moderator. So give me one moment. Bear with me. Almost there. I didn't realize how many folks are on.
Jolene, Shadeja, while you're doing that, and I think what's important to, and a question that we're often asked is our goal is to provide prevention, awareness, and wraparound service. And so as we provide and give, this is not a training, this is just a virtual forum, but there is training that can help understand human trafficking. And we encourage everyone at different levels to examine what that looks like, because in each community, it could look a little different. And we're also seeing and exploring concerns from the community for our relatives who have a type of disability, and then somehow it's become a norm to solicit or have sexual solicitations for those individuals who cannot properly consent. And so we know that is going on in our communities. And so as we continue to raise awareness, we want to have those open dialogues so that our community members continue to call on those cases so that we could work with our law enforcement for prosecution and to rescue those individuals who are caught in some type of scheme. So thank you.
We're and nation is big, and we shouldn't forget about the ones who live off the reservation.
Welcome back, everyone. Welcome back.
Hello.
Hi. Do we have everyone back? Okay, awesome. I hope you all had some really good discussion, and our MMDR core team folks, just a quick reminder, make sure to take notes and jot down some of that feedback that we're receiving from our community members and things of that like. With that, I'm gonna go ahead and pass it over to Jana. Feel free to introduce yourself, Jana, and you should be able to share your screen.
All right, there I go, unmuting. So first of all, I just want to quickly introduce myself. Thank you, Jolene, for inviting me to be a part of this discussion. I actually, when I received the invite, I was trying to already pass it off to the U.S. Attorney's Office because I truly feel in my heart that they are more specialized in terms of tribal jurisdiction, specifically for Navajo Nation. So I just kind of want to make that disclaimer. And I did talk to Jolene about this, but I believe that through the work that I've been doing and my professionalism and relationship with other agencies, our partners, which is the U.S. attorneys and the tribal communities here in the state of New Mexico, I can give a basic brief overview in terms of jurisdiction. But first of all, I'm originally from the northern part of Navajo Nation, which is out in Cajon Mesa, Utah, which is Aneth and Montezuma Creek area. That is where my grandparents reside. And it wasn't until 2009 or 2008, it's been such, a long time, that my husband decided to go back to graduate school and become a licensed psychotherapist. And so I just followed with our little family here. And so it's just been an amazing journey to find the tribal members here in Albuquerque in our small community, and just being able to invest this work and seeing how it's grown over the years. I remember the first time I was at the Coalition to Stop Violence Against Native Women back in 2015. And then from there, my work and capacity has brought me to the Attorney General's office, which I'm truly grateful being here in a different capacity, to where my experience working with victims of human trafficking has allowed me to share that at a state agency level, in addition to the missing and murdered women issues, whether it comes to tribal communities and how the state can be more involved. And so I just wanted to make mention of that and go ahead and get started. Sorry, it's not going forward.
You have to click on it. It's a little weird sometimes if you just click the screen.
Okay, got it. I have to move. Okay, so jurisdiction, what is it? It can be defined as the power or authority of a court over a particular person, area, or subject matter. When I think of jurisdiction today, it can be very jarring in trying to understand that we have personal jurisdictions, we have many different levels of agencies that have jurisdiction. So what I'm going to be covering today is just basically the criminal jurisdiction side. We also have like civil jurisdiction, and it can go on and on. But I think in terms of human trafficking, when an individual has experienced being a victim of a crime, we're talking about criminal jurisdiction. In a criminal case, jurisdiction is the power or authority of a court to try and to punish the accused for a violation of the government's criminal codes. And then down further in the slides, I have some human trafficking criminal statutes that pertain to the state of New Mexico. And so it's in violation of those statutes, those laws that are put forward for the protection for victims of crime. And so I think that's really important to note when I'm talking about this type of jurisdiction. I'm just checking the chat really quick. And then when we think of jurisdiction, we also have to include, Indian country. So what is Indian country? And this is actually a federal statute definition: all lands within the limits of any reservation under the jurisdiction of the U.S. government, notwithstanding the nuances of any patent or including the rights of way running through the reservation. Letter B, all dependents Indian communities, and C, all Indian allotments, the Indian titles to which have been extinguished, including a right-of-ways running through the same as well. So those are just some basic definitions, what Jolene has asked me to share with you all.
Thank you so much, Jana.
Yeah, sorry, it's not going forward. I don't know why it's doing that.
I know you have to click the screen. I try to use the buttons, but the buttons don't work for some reason.
Okay. All right, there it goes. So if we look at the history of federal Indian law policies, we understand, and I think that I actually get educated sometimes a lot by social media, Facebook and Instagram, I think, and TikTok videos, what our youth are putting together. But when we look at our history, it has a huge impact of what we're talking about today in terms of jurisdictions. It may be a simple case that I'll share, here in a bit. Oliphant is one example that kind of sets precedence of like this issue took place where a non-native offender committed this crime on Indian country, or this individual who is a defendant is an Indian and committed this crime on state land. So who has jurisdiction? So I think we have to understand that federal Indian law policies play a huge impact when it comes to jurisdiction and the history of that. So when you look at our treaties, I like the fact that we have treaties. I think that our forefathers and our ancestors were really smart to say, all right, we're only going to negotiate and we're going to go into this negotiation unless we have this written down and it's a treaty. So I truly believe that treaties set the precedence of like how we want to be treated in terms of our sovereignty. So acts of Congress, when we think of like Supreme Court cases, I'm thinking like the Oklahoma, when we had that case ruling last year in the summertime, that was a huge win for Indian country, because if it didn't go in our favor, then it would have been an issue for other tribal nations down the road, and then that would have been the precedent. So I think we have to think in terms of some of these U.S. Supreme Court cases and how they set precedents, and we have to have our best attorneys on these cases that understand that they can affect generations down the road. Three sovereigns are sharing some authority over matters arising in Indian country. I think this is, I get asked this question all the time is, how is it that state and federal and tribal jurisdiction, consider these three sovereigns, make things so complicated in Indian country? And that's just how it is. And I think we have individuals who are really specialized when it comes to in federal Indian law and jurisdictions. And I truly believe our partners, the U.S. Attorney's Office, has been really amazing in terms of the quick assessment of a case and really bringing those experts to help get that case to prosecution. And there's a whole process of even getting to that point. Is there an arrest made? Is the victim identified? And I just want to quickly say, like, I use the word victim and survivor interchangeably. I know that with our non-governmental agencies like to use the word survivors, but when I working in the criminal justice system, I've come to just saying victim, and so I just want to quickly state that. But yeah, so jurisdiction. Let me check the chat really quick. It's okay. I think it's helpful to share the Major Crimes Act for me that clarifies justification and who has jurisdictions with crime. Thank you. U.S. Supreme Court. Okay, so moving on. There we go. Okay, so I think one of the questions we get asked all the time when I think of like my previous job working one-on-one with victims of human trafficking, I can remember specifically one case where I had an attorney reach out to me and said, I have a case that I have been working on for the past 4 or 5 months, and I have not been able to find which jurisdiction, I can try this case in. So I just asked her, I actually just sent her this, table and said, this is where it would fall under. What was complicated in her situation was it was considered a labor trafficking case. So it was really interesting, and there was multiple people that were involved who were the survivors of this labor trafficking case that took part on the southern part of Navajo Nation. So it just becomes really daunting, and it's very complex. So again, you always want to ask who's the individual who committed the crime, the offender, the defendant, and then who's the victim of the crime. Those are kind of like the two major things that will determine like who has jurisdiction. Again, I can go in more in depth about, okay, the geographical location, what is the specific crime that was committed? Those are two other factors that can determine jurisdiction. And we just don't have time to go over that. So this is just a basic table to let you know. And if you ever, I have my contact information at the end, if you ever want more information, or maybe you have a case and you just don't know, which jurisdiction it goes into, our office is more than willing to help you. We work on the daily with FBI and Homeland Security, and they're very quick in terms of their response on who has jurisdiction on this case. Indian, being the defendant, the victim being Indian, of course, these are federal felonies in a tribal for misdemeanors. And I think this is where we talk about like tribal court jurisdiction and how important it is to understand like some of their cases they have been able to try in tribal court is important. And that falls under the Violence Against Women Act, being allowed to prosecute non-natives on, Indian land in those cases and so forth. So it just becomes so complicated. And then the second one, Indian being a defendant, the victim being non-Indian, federal for felonies, and then tribals for any type of misdemeanor offense as well. If we look at the defendant being non-Indian, non-Indian, the victim, that has state jurisdiction. And I just want to say in that terms, that's kind of like where a little bit of my expertise falls in when it comes to the Attorney General's office and where we involved ourselves when it comes to human trafficking cases. So we had an issue, I think many of you guys know, out in Shiprock, the issue with labor trafficking, with that whole case that took place last year in the summertime. And so our office received a notification tip from some individuals from the agency, and then also I think a member from the community. So that kind of prompted us to look into the case and who has jurisdiction. And it made it very complicated because of the fact that it was Indian who was a defendant, and we had non-natives who were being labor trafficked. So I think that when we involved our partner, the LifeLink up in Santa Fe, to go and meet with our special agents out in Farmington to interview some of the victims, it was really difficult to determine them, I guess, subscribe them under the definition of labor trafficking and being a victim of that. And then therefore they are able to receive an application to submit through the New Mexico Crime Victims Reparation Commission. So I think in terms of state jurisdiction, historically, we don't really have a good relationship working with tribal communities. But I think that when we're looking at a lot of the state agencies today, they're making a real effort on how they can be an assistant to the Navajo Nation Attorney General's office. How can we work with the local agencies, whether it's like Farmington or the Bureau of Indian Affairs? So I think that within the past decade, I've seen some momentum where the state agencies have been wanting to be involved and help being assistants to a lot of these cases, because when we look at the Attorney General's office, I see just the A team. I see special agents who are specialized in these cases. They have unique investigative techniques and skills. They have years of trauma-informed interviewing skills with victims. We have forensic analysis. We have an entire lab dedicated to finding these traffickers and really just kind of honing into those skills. And like, we have this support, we have this network, we are set up to help investigate these human trafficking cases. So I guess what I'm saying is that there's a wealth of assistance there, and I wouldn't want it to not be able to help a case that happened in Pueblo, a Pueblo village or the Navajo Nation. So I can speak more, I can talk more about that, and that's where I have more knowledge on. Moving on, if the defendant is non-Indian and the victim is Indian, that's considered federal. And again, that's where we work with our U.S. Attorney offices upstairs. And then last one is just talking about, so the Indian and then the victim being victimless, that's the federal tribal jurisdiction. And then the last one is just talking about being the victimless. Those are just talking about like being pulled over, you know, maybe you have a warrant and the state police pulled you over on like a public traffic ticket or something like that. Okay, I gotta hurry up. So this is just a quick overview. The U.S. Supreme Court's decision, Oliphant versus the Squamish Indian Tribe, 1978, limits the abilities of Native nations to try and punish non-Indians under this decision. Native nations generally do not have jurisdiction to prosecute non-Indians. And that's been the historical perspective when it comes to jurisdiction. In terms of human trafficking, though, I think we have to understand that when human trafficking occurs, a lot of those statutes and they take precedence. We want to make sure that this crime committed, this violation, therefore we have the ability to prosecute. And I think in terms of when these cases come to our office, my role and my skill is understanding what are the victim's rights. And I'm sorry, I'm like running out of time, so I really just have to quickly move on. Tribal Law and Order Act. When we think of the Tribal Law and Order Act, it has a lot of enhanced sentencing and this ability for tribal communities to really assert jurisdiction over these types of crimes that are committed in Indian country. When we look at historically domestic violence and sexual assault, those are definitely identifiers that can be seen as human trafficking, because sometimes we have people that come to us and they're like, my boyfriend, I love my boyfriend, he's the love of my life, but not realizing, you know, unfortunately the boyfriend is considered the trafficker. And so, you know, a police officer goes to their house and it's considered, you know, a domestic violence situation, when realistically it's human trafficking that's taken place. Sexual assault, like Eric Gale was talking about, you know, not realizing that the cases he was coming in contact with, those were human trafficking cases. So we have to understand, like historically, we had sadly missed some of these identifiers, but I think because of the education awareness and technical assistance, I know even Jolene provides from the Coalition to Stop Violence Against Native Women, is incredibly important for community members to help assist a lot of the professionals in this movement to help identify human traffickers as well. when we think of strengthening tribal courts, justice system, and tribal sovereignty, this is where I think the Attorney General can provide technical and other assistance to state, tribal, and local governments that enter into cooperative or MOU agreements relating to mutual aid, hot pursuits of suspects, and cross deputization. So we actually used to have that here in the state of New Mexico with some of our public communities here. And unfortunately, my supervisor, Commander Anthony Mays, made a mention that, it was about 2014, there was an incident that took place, and it was really, I guess, something horrible happened. And so from there, the Attorney General's office just had to pull out because there were some disagreements with the tribal nations and then the Attorney General's and the Bureau of Indian Affairs of who's going to respond. And I think that creates a lot of confusion with deputies being able to, our state deputies being able to go into tribal communities and so forth. So, but I can say that our Attorney General's office has been able to assist the Pueblo Otsuki. Last year, they applied for a multi-million-dollar grant in human trafficking. And I was really amazed reading the solicitation and what they were really seeking and what they were asking. I think it was beautiful that they were asking that they were approaching this in a very proactive approach, saying that we understand, human trafficking and sex trafficking occurs because we have a tribal casino. Therefore, we want to be able to have we want to have this extra judge. We want to have an extra court clerk. And they just named out specifically what they need to better assist their sex trafficking cases. And I was really just amazed of how our tribal communities need to think in terms of that mentality, having a proactive approach to sex and human trafficking. And what does that look like? Pueblo Otsuki, I definitely have to say that they're doing an amazing job, and they actually received that grant. And so our role, giving them a letter of support for this grant they applied, we're going to continue providing some technical assistance, and our special agents are going to help train their law enforcement and their judge and their courts and so forth in terms of sex and human trafficking. So I'm going to skip the rest on that. Why protect traffickers, condition victims to not report, to not trust outside help, to rely on their victims. These statutes can, the statutes are the next ones, can help break the trafficker's bond to the victims and give back agency and victims to them. These are a few of the statutes that our prosecutors department work with. If any of our traffickers violate them, we have the means to arrest them, prosecute them, and continue investigating those cases. So I just want to make mention in terms of like victims, being a victim of a crime. I truly believe that a lot of our professional therapists, our lawmakers, our leaders, I guess just being in this field for some while, I realized that we need more education to our professionals and why it's so important that our victims understand their victim rights, that they actually have victim rights in terms of being compensated for what has occurred, them being a victim of a horrific crime. And I think a lot of our professionals don't understand that they have to be compensated and that they have access to financial assistance for their mental health, spiritual well-being, and continuing this healing process. So I'm a huge advocate with understanding that our victims do have rights. They need to know that as well. And just the general public knows that, when you get pulled over by a police officer, you're read your Miranda rights. And I truly believe when a victim, when a crime occurs and a victim comes out of that situation, they should know their rights when it comes to being a victim of a crime as well. So I'm a huge advocate for that. And these are just two of the questions that Jolene had asked me to state. But again, I'm so sorry that this is just the most basic overview of jurisdiction that I could put together, and I can talk more and more about it. I just want to say thank you, Jolene, and I hope that these are questions that kind of just spark some interest. Somebody was mentioning about legislation for Navajo Nation, and I do see some gaps here in the state of New Mexico. In some of those gaps we can fill in terms of our tribal nations and our victims' rights when they are a victim of a crime here in the state of New Mexico. And so I always have some thoughts on like, how can we do some legislation for our Native women that are victim of a crime here in the state of New Mexico. So think of ways state agencies can help with tribal courts, personnel, and survivors, and why would a victim file a civil case against her offender? Again, civil jurisdiction, that's another conversation. That's the ability to allow victims to be compensated to sue, you know, the perpetrator, the offender, sadly, you know, within a human trafficking case. So yeah, Jolene, anything else you would like me to cover? I just thank you, everybody. I tried to stay on the chat, but I just had so much more to say.
Thank you so much, Jana. I really do appreciate that. Jana, if you could copy and paste this and put it into the chat to everybody, then everyone can see the chat. So feel free to drop that in there. I also encouraged folks to write down those 2 questions. So each of your group should have a moderator who will help discuss those questions that Jana just posed. So Jana, if you could please drop those 2 questions in the chat, that would be great.
Okay.
And I am going to assign you all to a room. So feel free to join it as soon as you get that prompt. And we will see you all back here in about 10 minutes.
Or other areas where they're a victim of violence. So at this time, I just want to give all the time and energy to Shadeja to tell the story of her program, the work that she's been doing, and then collectively, and we're learning from the breakout sessions that, you know, there's a few on the call that this is the first time or your first experience really hearing this broad conversation. Just be easy with yourself. Just give yourself the capacity that you could take in. We understand we're in a pandemic. We understand there's challenges at home. And so we'll still be here collectively and having these conversations. So make sure you take care of yourself first. But I do want, Jolene, if we could hand it over to Ms. Curtis, and then we can hear her presentation. Thank you.
Yes, of course. Michelle, we'll go ahead and pass it on to you. Really excited to hear from Michelle in terms of the work that she does and the program. So
I'm going to share a screen.
oh, sure. Let me stop.
Introduce yourself.
Yat A Diné. I would like to thank Council Delegate Amber Crotty and Jolene Holgate and Mesky, all from who represent the murdered missing Diné relatives, to have me here to speak to all of you. I'm very honored. I've always wanted to work within, you know, with Navajo Nation, where I come from. So I'm really excited to share what I do here in Albuquerque with all of you. So let me first formally introduce myself. Yat A Michelle Curtis Yanishia, Hoanthlanen Nishla, Matdishkijni Bashishchin, Tetnazani Dishache, Tachitni Dishanella, Akut Ego Diné Astan Nishla. I am from Ninanazad, New Mexico. I now reside here in Albuquerque. I've been with First Nations since 2018. I am the lead case manager for the CARES program. And let me tell you a little bit more about First Nations. Let's see here. Can you all see the screen?
Yes.
Okay. So First Nations Community Health Source is committed to providing a culturally competent, comprehensive health delivery system, integrating traditional values to enhance the physical, social, emotional, and spiritual needs of American Indian, Alaska Native families, and other underserved populations residing in Albuquerque and the surrounding area. So that is our mission statement for First Nations Community Health Source. And we have several locations. So here in Albuquerque, we have the main clinic, Zuni, on Zuni Road in Albuquerque. And then we have the Central Clinic, which is our, it's called the Family Clinic. And then we have All Nations Wellness and Healing Center, and that's our meal site. So all our relatives who are on the streets can go to the All Nation and Wellness Center to receive breakfast and lunch. And then also we have the Truman Wellness and Traditional Wellness Program, outpatient BHS Healthcare Center, and that is where my office is located. And then also we have our Gallup location with the HIV prevention and the Farmington location. So here I'm going to talk about impacts of homelessness. So let's see here. About 15% are sexually assaulted or raped, 18% are assaulted with a weapon, 32% are beaten up, 41% are threatened with a weapon and robbed, and then 60% is any victimization. So this is what our unsheltered relatives go through. And this doesn't just involve women on the streets, it involves men, it involves our LGBTQ community, our transgender community. And then here we have our primary care at First Nations. So we are a medical clinic. So they have urgent and same day care, immunization, family planning and birth control, women's health care. They have HIV, STD, and hepatitis C testing and treatment, and they have Suboxone treatment, and we have COVID-19 testing. We have the providers can provide a disability letters, and then we do outside specialist referrals. The one thing that is important to these programs at First Nations is we do conduct street outreaches. And this is to promote East and Care programs. We are sister programs. So East and Cares, we both are provide case management for victims and survivors of human trafficking. We create trust and contact consistency with the people we encounter on the streets. We educate on human trafficking. We provide First Nations community health source resources. And this is when we identify and assist possible human trafficking victims. We provide food bags, hot meals, and right now we have masks and different PPEs that we're giving out to our unsheltered relatives. So when we're on street outreach, these are the warning signs we see. So oftentimes the people we encounter, especially women, they're afraid to speak to men. They have trust issues. Sometimes they're dressed provocative or they're in normal clothing. They're hesitant to give personal information. During the summer, we see this a lot is when we do our outreaches on Central. There are men on bicycles watching the girls who are working. So they keep a close eye on them. And then the victim would constantly look around, their eyes are wandering. And when we try to tell them about our services, it's a quick interaction. They'll just take our flyer and walk off. And then there's branding, scars, burns, or tattoos. I had a victim come in where she had, like those barcodes you find on items. She had that on her neck, tattooed on her neck. So with First Nations Community Health Source, we do have Medicaid enrollment. We help assist people with Medicaid applications, SNAP, cash and energy applications. and then help them with their insurance. And then we also have behavioral health, which is behavioral health, counseling, substance abuse counseling, AA meetings, opioid addiction services, seeking safety groups, and traditional healing and counseling. And then we also offer them dental, which is exams, x-rays, emergency and pain management, cleanings, and oral surgery services. So when we get a new victim or survivor who has never came to First Nations, they are considered a new patient. So these are the three main services we provide to them. Then also we have our diabetes prevention, HIV prevention program, and alternative therapies we offer here at First Nations. And then this is what we're seeing in Albuquerque. Who are the traffickers in Albuquerque? You know, a trafficker can be anyone, any demographic. Right now, our girls are reporting that there are Cubans on the streets recruiting our Native sisters, the cartel, gang culture, family members, construction company, friends, boyfriends, girlfriends, married couple, men, youth, women, men, and youth. So right now, the trafficked person. So as you see here, these are the risk factors that we see that come through our clinic. So they're experiencing homelessness. They identify as LGBTQ. They are in poverty, unemployment. They come from desperation, family background of violence, abuse, and conflict, and need to be loved, immigration status, youth in the foster care, and runaway youth. And then the victims we served here, they stated that when they're being labor trafficked, it's with construction, domestic servitude, panhandling, and they are forced to become a drug runner. And then with sex trafficking, there's escort services, pornography, forced street prostitution, online exploitation, and strip clubs. So here, this is a map of Albuquerque in Rio Rancho and Bernalillo. So our main zip code we see the victims coming from would be the International District, which is also called the War Zone. And that is all of Central up to Tramway. And then settings of human trafficking in Albuquerque, there's hotels, casinos, streets, homeless shelters, truck stops, gas stations, shopping centers, state fair and powwows, online exploitation, construction site, residential, private homes, and tribal communities. So we do have many Pueblo communities surrounding Albuquerque and Navajo Nation. So we do get girls who come into Albuquerque who are wanting a better life, but they just meet the wrong group of people, and then they get stuck or captured in the trafficking lifestyle. And once we get a a victim who just recently fled from the trafficker, we do have hotel vouchers, which can house them for 1 week in a hotel. And then we do housing assessments with the victims, and we do work with different safe houses, but with COVID-19, it's been a barrier because they do need to have a negative COVID result before entering in a safe house. And then here, this is our housing referral process. So we do offer housing referrals, placement into different programs. We work with Barrett House, AOC, New Mexico Coalition to End Homelessness, Albuquerque Heading Home, Navajo Housing Authority, Albuquerque Housing Authority, Subsidized Housing, Low Income Housing, the LifeLink. So we try to find any available housing programs that will take the victim in. And then this is the coordinated assessment system. So we use the system to get the survivor or victim into the New Mexico Coalition Coordinated Assessment System. And this will help the victim or survivor obtain permanent supportive housing. And then within the program, 100% of the victims and survivors are unemployed. They go through poverty, they're homeless, and they have addiction, and they suffer from mental behavioral health issues. And then with the CARES program, which I'm the lead case manager in, CARES is caring to achieve resilience and equality among survivors. So we do provide continuum care services to survivors of human trafficking that includes advocacy, client-centered case management, and linkages to care. And our location is at 65 Truman Street in Albuquerque, and we do offer walk-ins and appointment times. So both sister programs, we do provide transportation, wraparound case management, in-house referrals, traditional healing, ID and CIB assistance, legal assistance, housing resources, and social services. And then this is our demographics. So as you see here, 75% is from the LGBTQ community. And then we have 5% male, 20% female. And then the ages is 40% from age 30 to 39, 30% from age 18 to 29, and then ages 12 to 18. So within the CARES program, our youngest victim that came in, she was 13 years old. And then our barriers is stable housing, COVID-19, identification, criminal history, reliable phone, and transportation. And then as you see here, we work with tribal communities. We try to stay involved and work with each other to give each other different resources to provide support. And then these are the different organizations we collaborate with, which is New Mexico Human Trafficking Task Force, Attorney General's Office, the Lifelink Spoken For, Street Safe, Transgender Resource Center, the 505 Get Free, New Mexico Legal Aid, Rape Crisis Center, Crime Victims Reparation Commission, New Mexico Murder and Missing Indigenous Women Task Force, Coalition to Stop Violence Against Native Women. So with East and CARES, this is the staff right now. So we are fully staffed. And then these are our hotline numbers and resources. So if you have any questions, you can contact me. My contact is on the left side of the screen. And then we also have our the East lead case manager. Her information's on the right side of the screen.
Thank you so much for that, Michelle. It's such a thorough presentation on.
Yeah, I try to go as fast as I can, but I do have a story.
Okay.
Yeah, I'll be really quick. I had a victim who was being trafficked on Navajo Nation in Arizona. And of course, her trafficker was her boyfriend, and he used his relative's home as the spot to sell her. So she fled from Arizona and came to Albuquerque. And she told me that she reported this to the Navajo Nation Police Department, but there was no follow-up. So we're trying to work with her on getting her case ready. So we are working with New Mexico Legal Aid.
Shadeja, this is Delegate Crotty. If we'll have an offline conversation.
Okay.
In how we could support those efforts in investigation. We're building up a stronger communication with Police Chief Francisco and Criminal Investigators Director Henderson. And so we'll try to mobilize and see how we can support her and this investigation. So thank you.
Yeah.
Let me get back on video. Sorry. So Jolene, did we plan to show the video or as
Yeah.
helping us facilitate this discussion? Can you help us guide us into that next segment of the agenda? Thank you.
Sure. And I know we're running over a little time, so I did leave our email there. If you have any further questions for Michelle, Jana, or Moroni, feel free to email us and we'd be happy to pass that along. And of course, Michelle, Moroni, and Jana, feel free to drop your information in the chat if you'd like to do that. So we're going to go ahead and go into the last part of our agenda. I want to welcome Pete Sands to our space, and he's a filmmaker and a community organizer. And he had put together a very powerful video that I think a lot of folks may recognize or may know about, and we felt like it was a good time to have that shared within our space as well, to also increase that awareness. Because when we talk about the missing and murdered crisis and human trafficking, there's different ways to raise awareness. That can be done through, whether that's through data, whether that's policy advocacy, or victim advocates who are directly supporting survivors. But we also have the arts. We have amazing filmmakers and artists who are also getting their message out in that way. And it's powerful. So we want to share that tonight with you. So I will pass that over to Mr. Sands.
Good evening there. Can you all hear me?
Yes.
Someone get yes or no? Yeah. I want to thank you all for letting me be part of this this here forum. I got on a little late. I just got off the plane, got to my space where I'm staying. But it's really, really powerful to be a part of something like this. And I started work on a film of mine called The Hurting Song, which has been going on for almost 2 years now, that I've been filming and, you know, taking breaks in between doing other things like doing relief work for the COVID pandemic on the reservation on the Navajo Nation. But The Hurting Song was something that just came to me in a vision. And I had been hearing so many things about missing and murdered women. And then, you know, I grew up in a very turbulent, a very, very aggressive, very abusive home when I was a kid. So I related to a lot of people who are reaching out to me as an artist. People would come to my shows and they would say the music spoke to them because of something they were going through. So as I grew into a filmmaker, I always thought and figured I would do something to help that cause. And as I came more into more of the limelight, so to speak, I started using that to start speaking out about, you know, missing, murdered Indigenous women. And as I started along the process of making this film, one thing I've learned along the way is that more men go missing than women. I didn't know that. So that's something I learned along the process. And the last time I was part of this was in Tuba City, I think it was in Tuba City, if you guys correct me or not. You ladies that were there that brought me out there as well, I appreciate that as well. But when I was there, I had an elderly woman there meet me outside I think it was the chapter house we were at, after I showed bits of the film. And she asked me, like, why don't you showcase men? And I was like, I said, well, she says, you know, my son's been missing for about a year. And I was like, oh, I'm sorry, what's his name? She told me his name. And I was like, all right, I'll look into it. I'll talk to you later. I told her. She says, what about my husband? And I was like, he's like, he's been missing for 5 years. And she's like, my youngest son has been missing for 4 years. So I was like, okay. So that kind of opened my eyes because I figured, and because I was leaving a part of this big movement out. And so when I restructured the hurting song into a series rather than just a long documentary, I started focusing on men as well. So each series is be broken up into different stories and segments, and focusing not just on the women but also the men as well. And there's a lot of powerful stories I've heard during my time on the Utah Navajo Nation, on the Navajo Nation the past year, working the Utah Navajo health system, and people have felt very comfortable coming out to me and just, like sometimes I'll be eating in Bluff while they still had the restaurants open. They would just come and sit to me and tell me about their stories. And it was very powerful and it was very honorable, very honoring for people to come and tell me their stories. And so that's how I restructured the series. And it started, it speaks a lot because to me, I had a lot of opposition from like the NAC, some people that represent the Native American Church and the Medicine Man Association, the Hatahi Association, because to me, the last case I worked on with this woman named Eve, her abuser was a roadman who worked with the Native American Church, who was in the peyote music, and he had been protected for so long, but they finally nabbed him, and so I was coming out with that story, and someone that was a friend of his came to me and told me, "Hey, you can't, you got to be careful, kind of like how you present this, and not put too much shame on the Native American Church, and kind of put a little pressure on me to talk to when I present this case, that I wouldn't have mentioned the NAC too much." But I feel like it's such a huge, like such irony, because we Native Americans, we present ourselves as these very spiritual people. We're in touch with our culture. We're very proud of our culture. Yet we have this problem on the other side. We have such high domestic violence. We have such high numbers in sexual assault, such high numbers in child abuse. And so there's something in there that's missing. And we can't be this proud, super proud, spiritual people, yet we have this problem that we just kind of gloss over and we don't address, and then from all the research I've done for the film thus far, I mean, there's so many people that are involved in these things. It's from police officers to NAC to some church, some people that work at the chapter houses. So it's definitely something that I'm very passionate about, and something I've been working on the down low, because I don't want to scare people off. I want people to talk to me. I want people to be able to be comfortable with me and trust me as to not to reveal who they are, and and work delicately in that sense. So told me to show a video here. I think I know how to do that. Let me try this. Sorry, it's kind of, if I seem, as a filmmaker, I'm not really technically sound at times. Right, let me try this. Please be patient with me. I'm trying here. Can you guys see my screen?
Yes.
All right. So I don't know if y'all can hear this, but let me see. Here I am looking at myself. Let me know if y'all can hear it. If not, then I can just put the link in the chat, or I can just send it to y'all to send it to everybody else. But this is can you guys hear it?
I had a very, very,
Yes.
very fucked up childhood. I was physically, psychologically, sexually, verbally abused. And he had like just the worst anger. Like, I've never seen anybody have those type of anger issues. And now and I think about it now that you ask these questions. I did see them, but I didn't think it was a big deal. He pulled into a tunnel on a frontage road, and he just turned the truck off and came around and pulled me out of the truck. And he was strong, and I couldn't fight back. He just started beating me. All I remember was getting kicked in the face. He was biting and punching and kicking me everywhere. I remember losing total bodily function, and I tried to tell him to stop, and he didn't. He might have left me there for a while because the sun was coming up, and I remember him throwing me in the back of our vehicle, in our truck, and he drove so fast back to his family's residence, and then he tried to apologize. And where he bit me on my face and my head, it was horrible. My whole body was bruised. So I called my mom, and she called the fucking Navajo Nation police. The police came and they arrested him. Know what kind of officer he was, but it kind of seemed like he was a very aggressive type of man, like no feelings, no sympathy, no empathy for women that have been beaten. And he told me to walk to the EMS station from the family's residence, which was about a mile and a half away.
And this was a Navajo cop or Pueblo cop?
A Navajo cop. So that itself, I mean, to Sunny Boy, that whole Sunny Boy syndrome they're talking about, and that whole awareness that's been raised, and, you know, I've been a big advocate for it. It's something that I've experienced, and it's disgusting, and it's not good for women, especially women that are in this situation, being abused, and it's not healthy because, you know, there's some type of that cycle that they give off onto their children, no matter what. Or there should be awareness towards it. I mean, it should be like something that women need to embrace, especially old women or the older generation. You know, they carry that with them, like some sense of pride of having a son. Where's the pride in having a daughter? Where's the pride in having women sacred instead of, you know, sexual abuse or molestation as a child, child rape, everything that goes on the reservation is just covered with like that cute little Pendleton blanket and fucked up.
Here's another one I want to show y'all. Let me try that again. Sorry. But Sorry, bear with me, please.
I-
But here's another story that I was working on that is gonna be part of the series. It's this person right here.
I'm 28 years old. I'm from Shanto, Arizona. I was about six years old, almost 7. It lasted up till around my middle school year. It was kind of on and off. It seemed like it happened more when I was young, and as I got older, um, I never wanted to go home or be home alone while he was there.
So those are that's the tone of the things I'm doing. Um, I will continue doing what I'm doing on my end. Oh, sorry. I'll keep doing things on my end to keep this film going. But there's a lot of stories out there, and it's really hard to choose which ones to present. I try to choose stories that kind of and kind of net everything that really is a main concern and that are really unique and kind of covers a lot of bases. But it's definitely it takes a toll on me as well listening to these people tell me their stories, and it's very hard, man, and it's tough. And as a filmmaker, as a person listening to these people um, go through their trauma again, and you kind of take it on yourself as well. And I've learned how to take some time off and distance myself from it at times. um, but that's the film I'm working on, and hopefully I'll have it done by end of this year. But it's very visceral. I told these ladies and these guys, just say whatever comes to mind. I'm not going to censor you. Just tell me in your own words what happened. If you want to drop a few f bombs, or there's a couple. One of these episodes was one of the girls I was working with totally like freaked out, and her therapist kind of had to calm her down. But I'm keeping it as visceral and as real as I can. Um, but also we're looking out for the victims, their well-being as well, because we talk with them before we film them, before I approach them, we tell them this is what I'm doing. My producer shows them what we're doing, and a lot of them want to remain anonymous, and we keep their names anonymous. And that's why I shoot it in the way I do. So I don't show their faces, or I don't show anything that's unique about them, tattoos, scars, um, just to keep their anonymity so they can feel like they can say what they want to say. But in some instances, after I film and talk with the girls, after they tell their stories, sometimes they've never told anybody. And they tell their stories and they feel liberated by it, that they actually told somebody something that happened to them. And then they come out and then they start becoming advocates of this, and they start speaking on behalf of telling their stories about what happened to them, and they're vocal about what happened to them. And there's a lot of power in what we do here. I mean, it's it's a sacred kind of power for us to listen to one another. Listening is just as important as speaking up. And I don't know if you guys got any questions, but that's all I got for right now.
Yeah, thank you so much, Pete, for coming into the space and explaining some of those stories. And just just to let you know, the audience that you're talking to are not only community members, but we have a lot of victim advocates and folks who work within the realm of sexual and domestic violence. So if you ever need access or training or anything on trauma informed, especially when you're working with survivors and it can trigger them into these certain responses, we are certainly here and happy to help to provide more guidance on that. We always promote trauma informed training because it's really important to have a very safe space and have really soft and mindful language when we talk to survivors. I would even say I would shy away from saying victim because folks sharing their stories are survivors. They're the ones who are brave enough to bring those experiences and really inform the work that we're doing. So I just wanted to share that and really appreciate that. And Pete is right. About 70% of folks who are missing on the Navajo Nation are male relatives. But on the other spectrum of that, we also have such a high violent rate against our women. We've spoken with victim advocates in Gallup and Albuquerque who have informed us that the women that they've worked with sadly were murdered. So there's also those intersections between the missing and murdered crisis that relate to domestic and sexual violence. So yeah, so that's just some information for everyone to keep in mind. And just to close out, I want to go ahead and pass it on to Delegate Crotty to kind of bring us back together and send us off in a good way. Shede?
Thank you, Jolene and Chiaj, Pete, for sharing with us not only your experience, but bringing into the conversation creative healing energy where the work that we do is through counseling and advocacy, marching, raising awareness, but it also is healing through music, song, the visual arts, and sharing how not only that you're healing yourself, but also healing those survivors and allowing the world to know their story. And that's a very heavy responsibility. And so I appreciate the time and dedication that you have made in acknowledging those truths and really, having us have these difficult conversations to acknowledge what is happening, acknowledge that there are some create a perfect storm for individuals to continue to target community members. And so we just want to shed light on that. And so thank you. So as we close this evening, I want to thank everybody for being on the call, whether you were here on our Zoom call or we were streaming live on the Navajo Nation Council Facebook. I want to thank my colleagues on the Sexual Assault Prevention Subcommittee. I chair the committee, but we have Vice Chair Delegate Nathaniel Brown, Delegate Stewart, who's from the Fort Defiance Agency, Delegate Paul Begay from the Western Agency, Delegate Vince James, who is from the Ganado region, and Delegate Eugene So, who is bringing in his experience and the loss that his family has suffered from both of his younger sisters, each at different times were missing. And then we now know that they were violently assaulted and ultimately murdered. And so this, where this may have been in the past, silenced, shamed, blamed, let's just keep each other accountable and be the beacon of hope, hold that light for others who are out there. We know, so go and have conversations. And so let's challenge ourselves to try to get training in trauma-informed care, be considerate to one another, and recognize that we're doing the best that we can. But our tribal systems also have to be accountable for those who are victims of violence. And so we'll continue to amend some of the tribal codes, continue to tell our story. And we need all of you on the line and all of you who are watching this to be part of the movement. Talk to your delegates, talk to Navajo Nation President Jonathan Nez, Vice President Lizer. We need all of us on board to move this nation in healing, and so that when we have our children, our grandparents, that we are not having to be in a situation where they're consistently abused, violated, and then they and breaking this generational cycle. And so I just wanted to end with that, and I hope that you all continue just to live in beauty. And I respect all of you, and the breakout sessions provided beautiful insight, and we'll continue to have dialogue. We'll continue to try to use this virtual space to not only bring prevention, awareness. We'll need your help to pull in different resources, staying connected, and what we can do together for our nation. So thank you, Shadeja, Jolene Holgate. You did a fabulous job moderating. I'm not even sure how the backgrounds work, but on my end, I just appreciate your time and your energy. And for everyone else who is part of the Missing and Murdered Diné Relatives Working Group, it's a volunteer group. We meet every Friday at 10. We're talking about Data Institute, we're talking about jurisdictional issues, community toolkit, and really going back and supporting the families because they feel that they have been forgotten. And so during this time, we just try to check on one another. So be there, be kind, text someone right now, text your strongest friend, say, hey, I'm just checking in on you. Hope you're doing well. I'm here. Let's chat. Okay, thank you, Jolene, and thank you everybody on the call. We appreciate it, and we're the ancestors that our children need, so let's do that.
Shema be on the Beishato, Shema be on the Beishato, Shema be on the Beishato. Nishoneko Beishato, Nishoneko Beishato, Nishoneko Beishato. Sheshe penanetken Beishato, Sheshe penanetken Beishato, Sheshe penanetken Beishato. Nishoneko Beishato, Nishoneko Beishato, Nishoneko Beishato. Shenale pesote zen beishato, Shenale pesote zen beishato, Shenale pesote zen beishato. Nejoneko beishato, Nejoneko beishato, Nejoneko beishato. Shema sane bein beishato, Shema sane bein beishato, Shema sane bein beishato. Nejoneko beishato, Nejoneko beishato, Nejoneko beishato. Tkate natke bikeke shato, tkate natke bikeke shato, tkate natke bikeke shato. Neshoneko beishato, Neshoneko beishato, Neshoneko beishato.
Good night, everyone.